This is Debt Free in 30. Let's begin.
This is Debt Free in 30. Here's your host, Doug Hoyes.
Well, let's start with the introductions. Who are you and what do you do?
So my name is Ian Penny. I'm a CACPA and a licensed insolvency trustee from Newfoundland, Labrador, Canada. I've been doing this kind of work for about 35 years now.
See, I was wondering if I detected a hint of an accent there. So that would certainly explain it. So now, Ian, I believe you were actually a guest on the show. I'm guessing, I don't know, it was 7 years ago, 8 years ago.
Sounds about right.
9 years ago. So every 7 or 8 years, we're going to invite you back.
Okay.
We are recording this today in my office in Toronto, which is why the setup looks slightly different than our normal studio. You have made the trip from out east to Toronto.
I have.
And you are, shaking hands and kissing babies while you're here. You and I will be attending a conference tomorrow after we record this. It'll already have happened by the time this airs, so hopefully neither one of us has been kicked out of the profession as a result of that. Me more likely than you, probably. I wanted to have you on for a few reasons, and people watching are going to see, where's this script? We got no script.
No, we just talk.
We just talk, which you and I have done many times before. So my first question for you is, what's happening out where you are? So most of the people listening to this broadcast are either from Ontario or from other parts of Canada. There are not as many people out east as there are here in downtown Toronto. We know what's happening in Toronto and Ontario. It's a mess.
Yep.
What's happening in Newfoundland and Labrador?
Well, I always joke that we're not a half an hour different in time. Normally we're ahead, but I think when it comes to the economy and the trends in North America, we're usually a little bit behind. So what happens in Toronto takes a year or two to make its way to Newfoundland. So things are, it's kind of hard to describe now. Newfoundland doesn't have a big middle class. So we've got some people with very low incomes. We've got some people with very high incomes, people who are working in the oil field or mining or some of those sectors make very good incomes. But not a lot of good, solid middle class jobs, not a lot of government jobs. So there's a great disparity. So whenever I talk, I'm kind of talking about two different populations.
Well, and that's a excellent point, because I'm a firm believer that everywhere in Canada, everywhere in North America, probably everywhere in the world, there are more than one economies.
Yeah.
And so you heard about this pandemic thing. Did you guys do that?
Yeah, we had a little bit of that.
You did that one thing too,
yeah.
Where you were. So there were people who benefited fantastically because of that. It was
Absolutely.
the best thing ever. If you owned a house, if you owned stocks, inflation made everything go up. You could work from home. You didn't have to pay for daycare. It was like the most fantastic thing ever.
Right.
And then if you were somebody who cut hair for a living, sorry, you can't work. We're shutting you down.
Right.
And so there were huge winners, huge losers. And of course, the people who lost are finding out now that it's actually worse than they thought.
Right.
Because, hey, that CERB you got, you had to pay taxes on it. And now we've decided you don't qualify and you got to pay back. And,
exactly.
And SEBA, we'll talk about that in a couple of months, because that's a whole nother story. So what you're telling me is it's exactly the same where you are. Now, explain to me the people who are making good money. You've got, here's my knowledge of your province. You got 3 industries: tourism, and then oil and gas and fish.
Yep.
Do you have forest there too?
Well, we've got some forestry, not a lot anymore, and some mining.
So mining. Okay. So I forgot that. So let's start with oil and gas then. How does that work? It's all offshore stuff, or what is it?
It's all offshore. And anyone who watches the news knows that extracting oil from the earth is not really in vogue these days. And when you do it offshore, there's some complications that make it even a little bit more risky, with spills and damage to ocean habitat and fish stocks and so on. We just got another large project sanctioned. However, the word is that if this is not the last one, it'll be the second last one. So exploration has slowed a lot.
And so if I work on an oil rig, how much money can I make?
I can't give you a good number, but it's, I don't know, 150 grand.
Okay.
It's good pay.
That's decent
It's
pay.
good pay for.
And obviously it's dangerous work, and you're out there in the middle and the weather isn't great.
And you're flying back and forth on a helicopter in all kinds of weather.
So you go out there, you do a 12-hour shift, get on the helicopter and come back?
No, you're out there for
you're
7 to 10 days.
You're staying out there.
You're
Okay.
staying out there.
So it's very similar to what would happen in the oil sands in Alberta.
Exactly.
You do a 1 week, 2 weeks. I guess out there it's probably a 2 week on, 2 week off, or something like that. Okay, but there's really good money to be made if you're one of the people making the money.
Right.
So let's talk about the other industry then. So fishing. So what kind of stuff are you fishing out of the water?
So fishing is the reason Newfoundland exists, and it's the reason that St. John's was the first city in North America, because Europeans have been coming over to extract fish from the oceans for the better part of 500 years now. So historically, cod was king. In 92, there was a cod moratorium, and it has never properly rebounded. So now there's a very large crab fishery, would be the largest. Shrimp is a fairly large fishery, not particularly profitable. Some lobster, and then some minor fisheries. And you still can get cod, but certainly not to the extent that it would have been 30 years ago.
And how much is crab going for these days?
Crab goes up and down a lot. So you got the price to fishermen, and then you got the price in the market. So the market price is determined by largely the U.S., but also Asia and Europe. And the price this year is less than half than it was a little over a year ago.
Wow.
So you can see the problem when you're, paying $7 at the wharf and you're expecting to sell it for 15 or whatever the number was, and all of a sudden the market goes down to $6, and you've paid $7 at the wharf, and that doesn't,
Well, and if I'm somebody operating a fishing boat, I assume I got to put some kind of fuel in this boat?
Right. So the problem last year, the harvesters did very, very well because the price at the wharf was higher than it had ever been before. So, of course, these fisher people did fabulously last year. The people who bought the fish, the processors, got caught with warehouses full of frozen fish that they couldn't sell for anything near what they paid for it. So now roll forward a year, and the price negotiations are happening, and well, guess what? The processors got to get the price at the wharf down so they can kind of average down this year's processing output with last year's and get the price somewhere where they can make money. So this year the fishermen got squeezed out, and they went from $6 or $7 down to $2 or $3.
And if I am the person, the worker, okay, I'm not the owner of the fishery. I assume there's like two guys who own everything because that's the way it is in every
more than two, but you're on the right track.
Not a huge number.
Nope.
So they're doing fine no matter what happens. They're always good. But if I'm the person who's actually doing the fishing,
yes,
my income was pretty good, then my income was lousy.
Right.
And it's kind of hard to plan your future when you might be making this and now you're making that.
Right.
And I assume they're not making oil money.
Well, last year they did really well. So were they smart enough to realize this was an anomaly and put away all the money, or did they go out like a lot of people would do and buy a new truck and upgrade their boat and buy a new house and whatever, and
then you get caught.
So that's what we're facing this year is, they're grossing a third of what they grossed last year, yet their costs are at best the same and probably higher.
Well, because the price of oil is higher today than it was yesterday.
Yeah, I think interest rates have gone up too. And
I haven't heard about that.
A lot of people don't own their boats. So
yeah, so that yes, and I guess if you had a 5-year locked-in loan, okay, no big deal.
Fine. You're exactly
right. But if you
right.
bought it with your variable rate line of credit, you got a bigger problem. So Okay, so we talked about oil. We talked about fishing and crabs. I guess crabs aren't actually fish, but we call it part of the fishery, right? And crab, for example, is sold everywhere. So if I go to the store here in Toronto, or the restaurant, I guess, I could be buying stuff that came from your province.
You could well. It's difficult for me to get Newfoundland crab, but you probably can get it quite easily in Toronto.
Really?
Because it all goes into a container and on a truck, and it goes away.
Wow, because that's where the bucks are.
That's where the bucks are. No Newfoundlander will pay market rate.
Yeah, there you go. You guys are probably smarter than the rest of us. So then you said mining was a big thing. So what kind of stuff do you mine?
So mining is, a lot of it's in Labrador. There's some on the island as well. There's a fair number of gold mines. There's some new ones coming on stream. We just had a big restructuring in the southern part of Newfoundland around fluorspar, which apparently is a critical mineral for batteries and so on. So that one has just been changed hands through a restructuring, and the government's optimistic at least that that's going to go.
But it's a boom and bust thing too.
It's a boom and bust thing too, and it's just, the labor is always a problem because we've got a small province. These are all remote places where they're extracting these minerals, and it's hard to get people to work.
And how many people live in your province?
So we're about 530-ish, I'll say, 530,000. But the interesting part is within an hour of St. John's, which is as far east as you can go, is half the people, and the rest of the province is the other half.
Yeah. Well, and I guess all of Canada is a ribbon,
right?
That's within an hour of the U.S. I mean, maybe not.
Again, probably not so different.
Right. Yeah, it's everybody. Well, and so we are recording this at Yonge and King, I believe, and I'm going to make up numbers here because this is YouTube, right? You can say whatever you want.
I'm not going to tell you wrong.
I believe that the subway station at Yonge and Bloor, which is just, you can walk there in 15 minutes from where we are. Something like 600,000 people a day pass through that that one subway station. Might be 1 million. I don't know.
Yeah.
But the scale of the numbers, it sort of blows your mind.
Right.
That doesn't mean they're necessarily spending money at that subway station, but it kind of gives you a different sense of the scale, which I guess if I operate a gold mine or a fishery or an oil rig, I've got 500,000 people to draw from. And I'm guessing some of the people live there are kids or 80 years old. So it's
mostly the latter.
Mostly the latter. There you go. So is it a good place to retire to?
It can be. Healthcare is a big problem. So we've got
same here.
We've got a very vast province with very few people. We've got the oldest population in Canada, and some of the unhealthiest people in Canada. Sorry, Newfoundlanders, but it's true.
And why is that?
I think it's lifestyle.
Yeah.
A lot of us are overweight. A lot of us drink too much and so on. And that's kind of the culture there. We're fun people to be around.
We have water in our mugs today.
Just water, no rum.
I don't know what screech means, but we couldn't get any from our water cooler.
So, we got an aging population. I mean, the people who want to work get jobs and they work. And, of course, all these projects are all finite. So, you boom for a year or two and you get 2 or 3 of these projects going at once. You can't find enough people to fill all the jobs. And then there's a lull for a year, and they all go back to Alberta, kind of thing. And it's difficult to have a stable.
Yeah, and so interprovincial migration, I think that's a word. So what's been happening here in Ontario is everybody's been moving to Alberta.
Yes,
and I'm exaggerating because I didn't move, but I think everybody else did. Lower cost of living, more jobs, whatever.
Yeah, lower taxes.
Lower taxes. What happens? Are people moving in, moving out? Where are they going? What are you seeing there?
Well, if we go back, sort of 15 years ago, there was an awful lot of people because they got some great skills when our first project, Hibernia, came on stream in the 90s, and then there was nothing really close behind it. So they had all these people that had great oil skills. So guess what? They packed up and went to Alberta. And for a lot of years, a lot of families went there. More common was for, dad or I guess mom to go out and work for 3 or 4 months, or maybe be lucky enough to get on where they'd fly you home every 2 weeks for a week kind of thing, or 2 weeks. And that was very common. And around 16, 17, those jobs started to dry up, or at least became less attractive. And, you had to find your own way home, and maybe it was 3 weeks instead of 2 weeks kind of thing. And it wasn't as lucrative.
And if I wanted to go to Fort McMurray from St. John's, how long does that take?
That would take you're going through Toronto or Montreal, so that's, 3.5 hours, and then you got another 4 or so after that. But briefly, at the height of this, there were direct flights going to Edmonton and Fort McMurray from Newfoundland.
So even to get to Toronto is 3.5 hours.
Correct. You're still nowhere.
That's right. You're right here. And when all the rich people in your province go on winter vacation, all the oil workers, where do they go?
Newfoundlanders love Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But so does everyone in Ontario.
Yeah.
So that's, I guess everyone from the east is going there. And if you live in Calgary, you're going to Arizona.
Going to Arizona, exactly. But everywhere we go, there are some seasonal direct flights from St. John's. You can go, 4 hours to Orlando kind of thing, but typically you're going through Toronto.
So that's a big trip there.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a hassle. Now, we didn't talk about tourism, and I assume that's not anywhere near as big as oil and all the other stuff.
No, tourism is it's important. I don't mean to diminish it. It creates a lot of seasonal jobs and things, but you've got a very short season. We got 2, maybe 3 months. And, everyone wants to see an iceberg and a whale, and the chances of seeing both of them in the same week are pretty slim. And then outside of July, you're not going to see either kind of thing. So it's tough. You got a lot of small operators do great things. And we do have a very unique and interesting product. There's nothing like it.
Yeah. But it's, again, you're dealing with the issue of scale. And so were there any other industries we missed there, or those were the
a little bit of forestry. We used to have 3 paper plants. We're down to 1 now. So that's become,
because everything's digital now.
Everything's digital.
We don't make paper. So, okay. So I think the message I'm hearing from this is that your province, perhaps more than others, is very boom or bust. And if I've got the job on the oil rig and I'm making $150,000 a year, how much does it cost to rent to live in the big city?
Rents are still relatively low. They're keeping up. I think the boom and bust, like real estate is very stable, for example. So when you think of a boom and bust market, you're thinking about crazy swings in housing thing. We don't have that. But the people who make good money had better be smart, because next month you might not.
Right.
And it might be.
So what does it cost? We're here in downtown Toronto. You see all the big, huge condos. I assume you don't have 50-story condos in anywhere. No. So what am I renting? Am I renting in I'm just a guy. I work on the oil rig. I'm 25 years old.
Right. So there are some kind of condo buildings and apartment buildings, but more typically you're renting someone's basement.
And how much am I paying for that? So
you're probably paying now for a 2-bedroom basement apartment. I would think it's around $1,000 a month.
Yeah, and here for a room the size of the room we're in now, which we can barely stand up in, you're looking at $2,000.
Yeah, you could probably rent a small house for $2,500, maybe even $2,000 if you're a little bit outside the city. So We're still relatively affordable.
Yeah. So if I can get that high-paying job, this is great.
Yes.
Now, I guess if you want to go to the Blue Jay game every night, a little more difficult.
Right. Or the beach.
Or something, something warm. Okay, so this is a show called Debt Free in 30. As you know, it's on our mugs and everything. And so I want to spin this all back into the whole debt discussion, because you, like me, are a licensed insolvency trustee.
Yes.
And now you work with corporations as well as people.
Yes.
You got a broader scope than I do, because I can only focus on one thing. I'm not as smart as you. What are you seeing from the people that you are meeting with? Like, number one, are you seeing more of them now than you did, a year, 2 years, 3 years ago?
Right. Sorry. So the market in Newfoundland, I think pretty much across Canada, when COVID hit, basically the market for consumer insolvency got cut in half. So everybody was getting money from the government. You couldn't spend money if you tried.
Well, nobody could sue you. Courts are closed, so don't need to get any protection.
CRA stopped collecting and so on. So overnight we basically saw our business cut in half. And that's pretty much the way it was for the first year or so. And it's been building very slowly. The last maybe 3 to 6 months, it seems to be picking up a little more. We're still nowhere near the volumes we saw in 2019, but it's probably a third bigger than it was last year, which was a little bit bigger than the year before. But we're finding that the people, there's a lot of, sort of working poor people that we can help, and, we do our best to help them and so on. But we're seeing a lot of what I'd call some more mainstream people that you would think they have a good job or 2 good jobs. They have 2 cars in the driveway and a house. You'd think they're doing fine, but they're drowning in debt.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them, maybe bought a new house during COVID and overpaid, and now they're underwater on their house. Or some of them found ways to spend money that they shouldn't have during COVID, and the lines of credit are out of control. But we're seeing more of those people. The challenge is a lot of them, they might have equity in their house, or they might have an asset they don't want to let go, like a cabin they own or something like that. But they're struggling to pay their bills every month.
Yeah, house rich, cash poor.
You got it.
And you are subject to the Bank of Canada just like we are here.
Mm-hmm.
And we all know what's happened with mortgage rates.
Right.
I believe they were as low as something like 1.39% there at the height of everything. And now, off the top of my head, a 5-year rate is something like 6.5%. I
think you're very close, yeah.
And if Ron Butler's watching, he's throwing something at the screen saying, you got the numbers wrong. But so if you had a HELOC where all you paid was interest, your payments have doubled or more.
Right.
And obviously the dollar values we're talking about here in Ontario are different than than what you're talking about. Because if I'm buying a typical house that has, 3 bedrooms, I'm paying
$350 to $500 in Newfoundland.
Yeah, and you're paying $1 million here,
Yeah.
and that's not in Toronto. That's and it could easily be $1 million, $2 million, $4 million, $5 million. But in terms of percentages, same deal.
Right.
You went from having a $2,000 a month mortgage payment to $4,000 if you were paying interest only on your HELOC. And I understand how amortization things work. If you got a 25-year AM, then the interest rate doubles. That doesn't mean your payment doubles because that's not how math works. But it doesn't matter how you do the math. It's way higher than it was.
What matters is there's less cash in your jeans.
Less cash. And it's not just for your house because food costs more.
Yeah.
Same thing where you are, I assume.
Food is very expensive where we are.
And it's expensive here too. And it's gone up. I think food inflation has been something like 10% over the last year or so. So even though the headline CPI has come down, food inflation is a bit stickier for whatever reason. So, clearly, that's a big problem. So when your income stays the same and your expenses go up, what do? Well, you talk to your boss and say, hey, can you double my pay? And the boss says, no, I can't do that. So maybe you get a bit of a raise, but your income isn't going up anywhere near as fast as your expenses. How do you bridge the gap? Debt.
Unless you got savings.
Yep.
The credit card's going up.
Well, and we know the savings rate hit over 25% during the height of the pandemic because it didn't have any money to spend anything on.
Right.
But now the savings rate is back into the, I think, 5, 6, 7% range. And obviously all the stats we get are lagging because they only release it every quarter. It would not surprise me if over the next year and a half, we get back to zero, which is where it was in 2019.
Right.
And you're seeing exactly the same thing.
That's what we're seeing, yeah.
So someone comes in to see you, and if they have equity in their house, you're going to say, well, I guess you got to either get a mortgage, sell your house. Like if you've got a couple $100,000 in equity, and equity means if I sold my house, that's how much I get.
Right.
After paying off my mortgage and property taxes and penalties to break the mortgage and whatever. If you've got $50,000 in credit card debt and $200,000 in equity, then the answer is either get a mortgage, a second mortgage, a HELOC, or sell the property and pay it off.
Right.
Are you seeing more people who are in that situation who have house equity than what you were seeing a year or two ago?
I think we are. And, you say to them, well, maybe there's a reason they can't refinance their house. They're seniors now. They're on a pension. Somebody's sick, whatever. So not everybody can just go to the bank and refinance their house.
No, because you don't qualify because your income has gone up not as much as your expenses have gone up.
Exactly.
You don't qualify.
Yeah.
And then what you're also seeing, so clearly that's a problem. And so they come to us and we say, well, we can explain to you how a consumer proposal works. We can explain to you how a bankruptcy works. We do more consumer proposals here in Ontario as a proportion than you do because of the way the incomes work, although that number
it's narrowing, I think.
May narrow. Now, final question I got for you. Debt consultants.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I saved this till the end because we're recording this late in the afternoon. I know you are already out with some buddies and already had a Diet Coke or something with your lunch. So you're fired up here. A debt consultant, as you know, is somebody who charges a debtor money basically for nothing.
Correct.
So I've never had this debt problem before. I don't know who to talk to. I don't know what to do. So I go on Facebook or Instagram or MySpace or AOL or wherever the kids are going today. And this guy says, hey, I can
avoid bankruptcy.
Avoid bankruptcy. Don't talk to Ian Penny. Don't talk to Doug Hoyes because they're going to make you go bankrupt. We've got this deal and we can cut your debt by 80%. And all you got to do is pay us a couple of bucks and everything will be great. So have those people made it to your province?
So they've been there. So we've had not for profit credit counselors for many years, and they're a different breed. We don't want to mix them up. Some people they can help, and a lot they can't. And in fairness, usually they'll send them to us when they can't help them. But you're right. The for-profit debt counselors, we've always had them, but I think since the pandemic, they've really more prevalent in our market. And there's a couple of reasons, I think. First of all, there's more people who are in trouble looking for help. And secondly, our friends at the Superintendent of Bankruptcy in Ottawa have made the decision to open up the market in Canada. So now we have trustees from Ontario and Alberta and BC and so on who are able to practice in Newfoundland. And the Newfoundland trustees were very leery of working with these debt consultants. And Some of the others that have recently entered the market are less worried about working them.
You've got ethics? Is that what you're saying?
That's kind of what I'm getting around to.
Yeah, I thought I'd put a point on it. And what you're describing here, prior to the pandemic, all of our meetings were in person.
Yeah.
That's just how it worked. Now, I understand there were special rules. If someone was in a remote area, you could talk to them on the phone or whatever. But for the most part, if you wanted to file a proposal or go bankrupt, you had to sit in a chair, across from a licensed insolvency trustee. We had to assess your situation, give you advice. Right. When the pandemic hit, and in fact, this had actually started on counseling even before the pandemic hit, it was like, well, we still have to help people. So now, so long as you can see them on video, that's good enough. And so now we do a lot of meetings over Zoom or Teams or whatever. And as a result, well, wait a minute, I don't need to only talk to people who I can come into my office. Even if I'm sitting here in Toronto, I can talk to someone who's in your province. And in the past, the rules were, well, no, you only had a license to operate in your province, so it didn't matter. But now what you are alluding to then, and I want you to get in trouble with the superintendent, not me.
They know me.
Yeah, they know me too. What you're alluding to is the superintendent has said, okay, I will let you, that guy in Toronto, have a license to operate in Newfoundland
or New Brunswick or wherever.
Yep. And now there's still a rule that you have to have an office.
In theory, yes.
In theory, what do you mean by in theory?
So, yes, some of these folks have an address, but it's not actually an office. It's a P.O. box or it's a address at a rent by the hour office complex, so that they have no material presence there, and they'll admit it over the phone. But in order to have the license to operate in Newfoundland, then they have to have an address, and that seems to be enough to satisfy the regulator.
Interesting. Well, you and I are going to see the regulator tomorrow, so I'm going to see if you can have a chat with her. So what you're saying is you are aware of licensed insolvency trustees who are doing consumer proposals and bankruptcies in Newfoundland, who notionally have a presence there, but they're doing everything remotely.
Correct. And they really don't do bankruptcies, because if you do a bankruptcy, you have a risk that you might end up in court someday, which means they might actually have to get on a plane and come and sit in front of a judge. They don't want to take that chance, so they'll
Only proposals.
Only proposals.
Yeah. A creditor can object to a bankruptcy ending. They can't object to a proposal ending. They vote on it up front. So you know up front whether the proposal's been accepted or not.
Right. And as long as the debtor pays, you're all good.
Right. So they're cherry picking the files, dealing with the debtors where they can make money, but they don't have to incur the costs of having an office and having a local presence and all that.
Right.
Now, do you think that the tide will turn and that the average consumer will start to realize, well, wait a minute, I'm talking to somebody who frankly does not have the same accent that I do, which might be a competitive advantage because it's pretty obvious who's local and who isn't. Do you think that as word gets around that, you know what, you're just talking to someone in some office building in Mississauga, that tide will change, or do you think that's not going to be a thing?
Well, it'd be interesting to see. I mean, certainly I hope so. And to be clear, it's not that you can't do good work over a phone or a video call, but you still have to do the work.
Well, and I think there is a local knowledge as well. So if someone calls you up and says, hey, here's my situation, you go, boy, you got a lot of equity in your house, you're probably going to say, hey, here's a mortgage person I can put you in touch with.
Exactly.
Or if they've got tax issues, here's a tax person I can put you. Here's someone who can get your house appraised because you know all these people.
Exactly.
Because you see him at the wharf. I don't even know what that means. I thought that was a guy on Star Trek.
You're sounding like an upper Canadian there now, Doug.
I am. I don't know what that means either. But so it's pretty obvious when someone is a local.
Right. Because
you understand what they're talking about.
Yes.
And so do you think that the tide will turn, or?
I hope so. I mean, my latest ad campaign in Newfoundland actually says that we don't have a call center and we will meet you in person, not just by video. And that, you meet with us and your file will stay in Newfoundland and the decisions will be made with somebody in Newfoundland who, yes, probably talks like you, but also understands your situation. And I think you get a better outcome. And then when you roll in the whole debt consultant piece, where these debt consultants feed some of these, what I'll call Canadian trustees, for lack of a better term. And, in my opinion, they don't do the due diligence that I would do on the file. And some of these people are getting very poor advice and ending up in a situation that's untenable. And
Well, you and I have both shared situations with the superintendent where it looks like the debtor is actually worse off.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a call just last week. This guy called me up and he said, I signed up with this. Apparently, I'm with a trustee. I didn't know. I called a debt counselor. I ended up signing papers for a trustee. I don't know who the guy is. He won't return my calls. I don't know who he is. I'm paying this money. I don't know where it's going. I don't know why I'm paying it. And, that's wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, when someone's sitting in front of you, it's a little easier to explain things. When it's on the phone, it's like, hey, we're going to send you these documents to sign electronically. Here you go.
Exactly.
And we do a lot of document signing electronically because that's how it works nowadays. But at our firm, and I don't know how it is at yours, I send you the documents a day or two before we're going to meet.
Right. And you explain them.
Yeah. So I'm going to explain it, then I'm going to send them to you, give you a couple of days to read through them. Then we're going to meet again, and whatever questions you've got, as I explain them, you can ask me. And then when you're ready, okay, then you can hit the electronic button.
Exactly.
But it's totally different than the other way. And what's most offensive about this, other than the crappy advice you're getting from someone who isn't licensed, is you're paying them a bunch of money.
For nothing.
For nothing.
Yep.
And why do you say for nothing?
Well, I don't think they add any value to the process. I mean, I've had people call me who've gone down this road and they say, I've paid $3,000 to this person. Did I have to do that? Well, no, you didn't. You could have called me or,
And how much do you charge as an upfront fee?
Well, we have a free consultation and, if I can't help you, there's no charge. And if I can help you, well, at some point down the road, I'll get paid, but it's not till I've done something that really is material and means that you get some relief. Whereas these folks take money before they offer any solution or any relief.
Yeah, the rule is we can't charge any fees before you filed the proposal.
No.
There's no upfront. It's not a thing. And so that's how you know it's a scam. If someone is charging you money before they've done anything, it's a scam. It's as simple as that.
Before you give me a nickel, you've signed something.
Right.
And it's a legal document.
Right.
It says proposal or bankruptcy on the top.
And yet you can't name who your trustee is. Like I'm pretty sure if someone comes in and meets with Ian Penny, they know who Ian Penny is.
They may not all like me, but they all know who I am.
But I think you, like me, are a straight shooter. You explain how it works. If you don't like it, okay, but that's how it works.
Right.
And that's where we go with it. So, okay, well, I'm saddened, but also glad that your experience where you are is very similar to what we're seeing here. In fact, all the things you listed for us, okay, you're 3.5 hours away by plane, but the basics are all exactly the same.
Yeah.
You got too much debt. You got to deal with it. You got to come up with some kind of a plan.
Yeah.
And you're better off dealing with someone who actually is licensed.
Right.
As you said, you're a CA, a CPA, a licensed insolvency trustee, as am I. There's some heft to that.
Right.
It takes a bit of time to actually get those designations, many years.
Yeah.
And so probably you're dealing with someone who perhaps has a clue.
Right.
I think that's the way to look at it.
And if I won't answer the phone, you can come to my office because I got 5 of them.
Yep.
All around the island.
And as opposed to that other guy who doesn't.
He's got a P.O. box.
Right. You can't really come and talk to him. So there you go. So I think that's an excellent way to close the show. If you're in financial trouble, our advice is talk to a licensed insolvency trustee.
Yes.
And if you want to meet with someone in person, great. Ask them if you can come in and meet with them in person.
And don't wait till your wages get garnished or someone seizes your bank account.
Yeah, the sooner the better, because again, we're not charging an upfront fee, so there's no downside to talking to us.
No.
Might as well do that sooner rather than later.
And if we're not the answer, we'll tell you.
Yeah, and I'm sure your firm is the same as mine. And what's the name of your firm?
Janes and Noseworthy.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see if at the end of this broadcast we can play one of your commercials. You're going to have to send me the tape. Do you have any TV commercials?
Oh, we do.
Okay, fantastic. We've never had a commercial on this show ever, and we're now in season number 10, but we'll see if we can make an exception. I think you want to talk to someone you can actually talk to. You can actually meet with. You can actually know who you're dealing with. You know what the name of the firm is. You know who the people are. I think if you can do that, you got a much better chance of success.
I agree.
Excellent. So if anyone is listening from Eastern Canada, how can they track you down? Is it just go search for Janes and Noseworthy?
Janes and Noseworthy on the World Wide Web.
There you go.
Newfoundland only.
So Janes,
Newfoundland, Labrador.
Janes, and Noseworthy, exactly like it sounds.
On your face.
Noseworthy. I'll put a link in the show notes to how people can track you down. And obviously, you like us, free consultation. You're happy to talk to anyone.
Absolutely.
Ian, thanks very much for making the 3.5-hour trip to be here.
Thank you.
I'm going to assume he just came for this podcast. There was no other reason why he was here. That is our show for today. I will put links in the show notes to what we've talked about, including to how you can track down Ian if you'd like to get an opinion on your financial situation in Newfoundland and Labrador. We have a new podcast every week, so I would appreciate it if you're watching this on YouTube to hit all those buttons, like and subscribe and notification. They come out every Saturday morning. Most people listen to us on audio as opposed, because I guess they don't want to see my face. I don't really know why that is.
You got a better face for radio.
Well, there you go. That's exactly it, a face for radio. So we're on all the major podcasting apps, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever. Again, subscribe. You'll be notified of every new episode every week. There will be a new episode next week. Until then, I'm Doug Hoyes. Thanks for listening. That was Debt Free in 30.